Yeah, this is going to be a hard video to make. To begin, this is Margaret Howe-Levant. She is a former naturalist. This is the National Air and Space Administration, better known by its nickname, NASA. And this is a dolphin. And let me tell you, out of the three parties mentioned, this dolphin probably had the best time. As mentioned before on this channel, NASA has a long history of doing weird animal-based experiments, and there's one that's probably more notorious than others for the wrong reason. That would be the time NASA tried to talk to dolphins. In the 1960s, NASA was heavily invested in the idea of extraterrestrial life. In fact, the United States was in a bit of a space craze around this time that would eventually culminate in the first moon landing in 1969. You know, if you buy into all that. On the US Virgin Island of St. Thomas was a laboratory dedicated to researching dolphins, headed by a man of many fields, Gregory Bateson. Also on this island was a young Margaret Howe-Levant, who, with absolutely no experience whatsoever, walked over to this laboratory, introduced herself, and ended up taking part in dolphin observations. Now, by all accounts, the average person would have booted her out after a few minutes of look-sees, but Margaret was actually pretty dang competent. In fact, she would end up making friends with another man in many fields, John C. Lilly, who just so happened to be working on a lab funded by NASA and the United States Navy. The lab's goal was to communicate with extraterrestrial life because 1960s. Dolphins seemed like a great way to test things, so they constructed a house, flooded it, and put dolphins in it. Ta-da! Dolphinarium. So far, everything in this story seems pretty normal. It was the 60s. NASA was doing NASA stuff. Nothing too odd about any of this, right? Well, let's go back to Margaret. Margaret was assigned to keep an eye on 3 dolphins in this dolphinarium for Mr. Lilly, who was probably out building shark tanks for Bond villains or something. Now, joking aside, this whole thing had an actual purpose. The goal was to teach the dolphins to speak back to humans. Dolphins are some of Earth's most intelligent creatures, and it's well documented that they can communicate with each other in the form of vocalizations. So the idea was that a human could talk to the dolphin, and the dolphin would intelligently talk back. So, did they talk back? Kinda. In fact, Margaret was able to get a young dolphin named Peter to mimic her in the water and documented him attempting to replicate her sounds. Unfortunately, however, that's not why this story is infamous. In fact, the reason this is one of NASA's best-known animal experiments isn't because of its scientific success, but rather what it took to get there. I'm gonna try to explain this as PG as possible, but Peter was a young dolphin, and young dolphins have, needs, and those needs needed to be satisfied to keep Peter productive. Yeah, Margaret had a Peter. Eventually, NASA and the US Navy had enough after seeing little success and pulled the plug on the dolphinarium. Peter would be moved to another facility, and while I'd like to say that he lived out a happy life, he sadly ended it prematurely. Yeah, maybe the dolphin didn't have the best time after all. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.